We can start. So thank you very much for joining this MODALES midterm event. Uh, I will make a short introduction to the project and then I'll introduce the first of three thematic sessions that we have this morning. I'm Andrew Winder. I've worked for Etico for about 8 years in clean and urban and low emission transport projects, and previously worked in consultants in the UK and in France. I will just give you a quick overview of the project first. I think if you've joined this webinar, you will know something about what we are working on. So the overall vision of MODALES is to reduce air pollution from all types of road vehicle, and especially older vehicles, by encouraging adoption of low emission driving behaviour and proper maintenance choice. So of course new vehicles are becoming better and greener each time, but even with the growth of electric vehicles, there will be still many older vehicles on the market and still on the roads for some years to come. The average age of cars in Europe is around 11 or 12 years, so even some of these cars will be polluting, and some user behaviour does have a significant scope to reduce this. So the areas where we're working are here. We're working to reduce the pollution from three main sources: the powertrain exhaust, brake wear and the tyre wear. And then our expected impacts are to, as I said, to reduce emissions from the car fleet and from other vehicles, also to stop things like this happening with all due to bad driver behaviour. So improve driving behaviour through a driving assistance app and an awareness campaign. Also looking at the maintenance side, providing technical evidence to assess gaps in current regulation of vehicles. And then finally, we are an international cooperation project with some partners in China which are just entering the project now, and also our results will be shared across the world, not just in Europe. Maybe a lot of you know about eco-driving and are wondering how low-emission driving is different. So eco-driving, there have been projects in the past, including some that I and other partners of this project have worked on. So we're building on past projects and past experience and not trying to reinvent the wheel. Eco-driving is really about reducing CO2 emissions and therefore fuel use. CO2 correlates with certain pollutions from vehicles, but there's also a discrepancy between CO and CO2 and other emission pollutants as well, so NOx and PM, particle matter especially. So these are the pollutants that we're focusing on more than CO2 in this project, and also not just from the engine but also from brakes and tyres, which I think has not been done before. And even if all vehicles become electric or other zero emission, there will be still brake and tyre wear issues. So we're working on how behaviour and maintenance can improve the situation there. These are our innovation areas. So you see there are four main themes: the driver, where we are developing a low emission style and a training, some guidelines and use of auxiliary systems in the vehicle, also increased awareness and campaigning and the real-time indication of emissions using an app. Then the second block is the retrofits, and this is looking at improving existing technology from one of our partners on buses and trucks, and also seeing to what extent it can be fitted or applicable to smaller vehicles. OBD is the next one, the onboard diagnostics. So looking at the scope for improving OBD and functionality and using data from it. And then lastly, inspections, also related to illegal tampering, as well as the annual inspections that apply to vehicles in most countries, or all European countries at least. And there on the left you see the exhaust emissions that we are looking at, and the brake and tyre wear at the bottom as well, the particle matter. So this is the project in a snapshot. We're about halfway through. We started in September 2019 and we end of August next year. It's a European Union funded project under this topic, low emission oriented driving management and assistance. And this is running parallel to a sister project called UCare, which is coordinated by TNO. So we are both treating the same theme but in different ways. So we're exchanging information between us. We have 16 funded partners in Europe, also 2 non-funded ones in China. So you see all the partners here. We've got a mixture of associations led by Ertico, which is my company. Then we are ITS Organisation for Europe. We have 2 universities in Europe, in Britain, Leeds, and in Turkey, Istanbul, and also a self-funded one in China, Southeast University in Nanjing. We have 4 research institutes, and then on the industry side, we have Brembo is a major brake manufacturer. Bridgestone and Michelin, you must know, they're famous for their tyres. Provencia is a company in Finland dealing with retrofits. Spark is a legal network, so we're looking at legal side and not just the technical side. Then we have a small consultancy in the UK called Dynotech, and then Sample Technology is another of our Chinese partners. So we have quite a range of different partners here, and you see our social media at the bottom that you can follow. So after me, I mentioned there will be 3 major thematic sessions. So the first one is the introduction, and also we'll talk about driving behavior aspects. Then we have a short break. Then my colleague Dimitri Margaritis from CERT in Greece will chair a session on OBD, retrofits, tampering and inspection. And then we have a question and discussion session. If you write a question in the chat box, the organisers of this event will see it. And if you want to write it during a presentation of somebody, if it's a quick question that they can answer, they can deal with it straight away. If it's a wider topic or something that needs some discussion, then it will be covered in session 3, chaired by Jean-Charles Pendazis. So the first part of this morning, chaired by me, after I've finished, Juhani Laurikko from VTT Technical Research Centre of Finland will explain a lot of the work that we've done, led by him over the past year or a bit more than a year, on the impact of user behaviour. Then we have Ted Zotos from IRU, the International Road Transport Union, talking about the guidance and training that we developed as a result of this knowledge. Then we talk about the app and demonstration by 2 colleagues, Sebastian and Ramiro, in LIST, which is the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. And then before the coffee break, Joan Domingo from RAC, which is the Royal Catalan Automobile Club, will talk about our on-road trials, which are in a ramp-up stage now and will start properly during this summer. So that's all for the introduction. You see my coordinates here, and also my colleague Sarah, who is working in the communications and designed our nice website, so anything on media and communications can go to her. So thank you very much. I think I can pass now the floor to Juhani Laurikko. Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to have this opportunity to share our. I can start. Okay. So this part is about impact of user behavior on exhaust emissions, brake wear, and tire wear, which all induce non-exhaust related particulates. The presentation is aided by colleagues from Brembo and Bridgestone. The objective of this work is to assess the impact of user behavior and driving style to various kinds of emissions from automobiles. We are doing lots of groundbreaking experimental work because these things have not been measured in real world before. We have separate tasks for processing all the data to determine the dependency with low emissions driving style and emissions. The team consists of several partners, including VTT, Brembo, Bridgestone, Leeds, Open University, CERT, LIST, and Michelin. So first, take a look at the powertrain emissions. We have this experimental setup where we have 15 drivers recruited from VTT people. We have 6 different cars, 4 with petrol engine, 2 with diesel engine, and then we have one route consisting about urban streets, rural roads, and highway sections. And all 15 drivers are supposed to drive all 6 cars on this route twice in one case. The demographics of the drivers are, we have 10 male and 5 female drivers with various ages between 30 and 62. And they all seem to have quite a lot of driving experience. We were not able to find any rookies in our pool, unfortunately. The vehicles are presented here. They are from mid-size to a larger size SUV, both manual and automatic transmissions, but we try to favor manual transmissions. They represent various different stages of type approval according to different Euro regulations. The route is located where VTT is located, which is the city of Espoo, west to Helsinki. And the route starts from our laboratory and ends there. It's about 31 kilometers in length, and it has different stages regarding speed limits. Most of the road is 40 or 50 kilometers, but there are other slower and faster sections as well. And there are a number of different incidents during the course of the route. There are several intersections, there are a lot of traffic lights, bus stops, pedestrian crossings, and stuff like that. And all these add to the complexity of the route, but we feel that it was quite a good choice. We are using the portable emission measurement system to measure the vehicle exhaust while driving, and particularly this device is meant for doing the real driving emissions tests, which are now part of the type approval. And we are recording during the drive. We record the position of the vehicle, the distance traveled, road gradient, driving speed, engine power, speed, throttle position, and various kinds of exhaust emissions, both as concentration but also as mass. And I will now show you a short video about the drive and how it looks, how this works. So the first thing to do is to install the system in the vehicle, which takes a couple of days. And then we get on the road. The drive starts from the laboratory yard and ends also there. And the driver has a navigator to keep him or her on track. And here we are coming to the first intersection out of the yard. Yeah, and as I said, there are a lot of traffic lights. I counted that there are about 100 of either traffic lights, bus stops, or pedestrian crossings, which can make you to stop. But on an average driving along the route, you normally stop only about 20% of those 100 stops. So it's pretty fluent and we try to use the quiet hours of the traffic, so morning and afternoon, so that the traffic will not affect too much to the driving. And here is a very slow speed section, 30 kilometer speed limit, where we have a lot of pedestrian crossings. There is also what we can call a rural road, 3 kilometer stretch, which has a 60 kilometer speed limit. And we have also a short section of motorway with 100 kilometers per hour speed limit. And here we use only one lane, so there is no coming to the traffic, but you had a free lane all over. And then we come back to the street level and crawl back to the starting point where the ride started, and we stop at the same spot. So the last 2 kilometers of the ride are the same streets, but driven backwards. So here you have a flavor of our results. These are 4 cars. 2 are with manual transmission, and these 2 here at the right side are with automatic transmission. And we can see already that the transmission affects to the results, so that sorry, I lost my screen. I hope you still see the presentation. Yes. Okay, sorry for that. So the left side has a manual transmission, right hand side has automatic transmission, and you can see that the amount of work differs more when you drive a manual, whereas if you have an automatic, the spread between different drivers is less, because you don't have to mess with the gearbox, and the car takes care of it. So you have more spread with manual, less with automatic. So here are the fuel consumption figures, and we can see that the fuel consumption differs between the best and the lowest drive, lowest consumption drive quite a lot, more than 25% in all cases. And also the emissions vary even more, from, let's say, from 80% to almost 200% change, the difference between the lowest and the highest. So there is definitely a driving style dependency. These are the particulate numbers, which also differ quite a lot from driver to driver and from car to car. And the levels are quite different. If we mark the car number 2 as 1, the diesel has only 0.0, only 4% of that level, whereas the direct injected petrol engine without filter has 300 times higher level of particulate emissions, whereas the one with particulates is on the same level. We are expressing and analyzing the results between the drivers compared to the average of the pool of the drivers, but we also assess the driver inconsistency between 2 runs. Here is an example where we have low consistency and we have a very high consistency, so very little change between 2 successive runs. And we have taken 3 of these in the further consideration. We see the cumulative emissions of CO2 differ, but more the cumulative emissions of NOx. So we are now seeing high consistency and low consistency. And when we take the first kilometer of this route, we can see that there are speed bumps in the yard area where the speed limit is very low. We have then first intersection and start riding on the street at 40 kilometers per hour. We have a second intersection. We have an uphill stage where the grade is about 9%, and then we have speed bumps before and after that stretch. And we can see that the engine power changes a lot during these incidents. Here are the NOx peaks, and we can see that the area in the speed bump uphill area creates a lot of emissions. So here are the three different traces. We see that the driver A creates a lot of NOx emission during the steep uphill. And we can see that driver G has much less emissions during the intersection and the speed bump, and not at all at the uphill. Whereas the driver E is between, creates a lot of emissions, but on the other ride, not so much. The first ride has higher, the second ride has lower. And there seems to be peaks. And when we try to analyze the engine speed or engine power, we see that they are different, but somehow the work done during this stretch is in both cases the same, but definite difference in emissions. And we try to understand why. So in summary of the exhaust emissions, we measured tailpipe emissions over a 30-kilometer route, combining different driving styles and different environments. We had 15 drivers driving 6 cars. We used PEMS equipment to record emissions. We were mainly concentrating on CO2, NOx, and particulate numbers. We detect clear driver-to-driver difference with various levels of inconsistency or consistency in driving. And we will use this data to assess the dependency between the driving parameters and tailpipe emissions. Then I turn into the brake emissions. This is by Matteo Federici from Bernbron. The brake emissions were measured in a special test setup in the laboratory, where the brake system was in an enclosure, which it can be utilized as a regular brake, but the air vented out from the chamber was put through a particulate number and particulate mass emission measurement device. So the particulates coming from the brake actions were measured directly from the air. And we use 2 different cycles. The one is a designated cycle called WLTP brake cycle, which is the upcoming standard to measure brake emissions. And another cycle was made according to the guidelines of lower emission driving developed by this project. And during the mild cycle, the brakes dissipate 20% less energy, and we could see that there was also less brake wear. And brake wear was measured. This brake temperature was lower with the milder cycle, and regarding the particulate mass, we could see that in all size classes, the particulate emissions dropped about 50%. Also, the particulate number was cut to half with the milder use of brakes. So we were successive in combining the lower brake emissions with the driving style suggested by MODALES. In summarizing, we implemented this new brake emission measurement setup and used real-time data collection to combine the wear of the brakes to certain incidents in the braking, and use this data to calibrate the existing models. And this gave insight for determining the features of driving regarding brake wear and particulate emissions. And the modified cycle was good to reduce particulates by 50%. The tire emissions were measured also experimentally. There was a fleet of 75 vehicles with 2 different kinds of cars and 2 different sizes of tires, and they were driven on the street. And the idea was to collect with telemetry data of the driving and measure the wear of the tires every 3 months. And the measurement of the tread wear was made either by handheld devices or an automatic laser beam. And we were especially interested in the dynamics of the driving, acceleration in lateral or longitudinal direction and speed. And this all was melted together to give the difference in type of road, this distribution of the speed of driving of each car, and also spread of these different measured parameters to give us things to assess the brake wear. And the fleet gave us the tire wear of all over the whole driving, but we get also intermediate results and the real-time measurement of driving parameters, which were recorded during the drive, was used to collect data characterizing the driving, and then this data was used to calibrate the existing models about tire wear and provide perception of key performance indicators of tire wear to be used in determining which is the good way of driving regarding tire wear and tire-related particles. So, in summary, we can say that we made unique experimental exercises to study the characteristics of both engine exhaust and non-exhaust emissions in relation to the characteristics of driving. The interdependency between driving style and tailpipe emissions was established and allowed parameterization of the low emission driving. And using the collected data and existing models, we were able to produce a list of key indicators for driving related emissions regarding both tire and brake wear. And we will publish a public deliverable end of June, which contains the methodology and results of these 3 exercises. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Juhani. I see two audience questions have just popped up. Maybe the first one I think you can answer easily. I don't know if you can see them, Juhani, as well, but he said, this is from Benedict Notter, and he asks, in the powertrain emissions experiments, your drive around Espoo area, were the drivers instructed to drive in a certain style, like mild or average or aggressive, or were they just told to drive as they always do?
Yes, they used their own driving style, so they were not given any instructions rather than where to turn and where to go. And actually, we were astonished how different people drive on the same route and how well they maintain that driving style. I gave you a few examples where the driving was quite consistent, but there was also some inconsistency, either from the driver not being concentrating on the driving, or there were some incidents that hindered them to drive as they would like to drive. Because this was on normal streets, you could not avoid things like traffic stopping due to the bus or something like that, which affect the result.
Mm-hmm. And then I saw a second question. It's from Guido Gielan. This is more on the brake and tyre emissions. For both brakes and tyres, how were the particles collected and separated from the particles in the ambient air or background emissions? I don't know if you can answer that.
Well, I can only say that the brake emission measurement was in laboratory conditions where the brake device was in a closed enclosure, and I'm not aware of if the incoming air was filtered so that it was supposed to be clean of particulates, and the exiting air contains the particulates from the brake device. But during the tire wear emissions, we were not able to measure any direct particulate emissions. Rather, we measured only the wear of rubber, and that was translated into the amount of particulates created.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that's all. Oh, there's another question just popped up here. So from the same asker, Guido Gielan, can you indicate the level of repeatability or reproducibility of the RDE testing, for example, with respect to changing or traffic or weather conditions?
Yeah, that's it. That's a subject of disturbance from ambient conditions and traffic conditions, of course. But as I said, that we try to in our test we try to use the hours of the day where the traffic in these streets does not differ much, so that there would be not much interrelation to other vehicles that you could drive as you would like to drive. And somehow I had the flavor that we succeeded in most of the cases, because for instance, the time of the drive did not differ much from one driver between two different runs, but it differed from driver to driver because they drove with different speeds, but they seem to be, some drivers seem to be very consistent with two different drives. But I've seen that the RDE test in practice in type approval cases can also produce a lot of differences. If you have the same route, same car, and different drivers, you get different results. And that's how it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Juhani, and thank you for the questions as well. So we go on to the next item of the agenda. This is this is from Ted Zotos from the IRU, International Road Transport Union. And this is moving from the impact of user behaviour to the guidance that we've been working on and how to translate that into training. And that this is an ongoing task that Ted will now explain. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So a bit lighter presentation from my side, not so many technicalities, but quite important as well. So we can get some benefits, some impact from MODALES out of the findings. The trainings, the low emission driving trainings which is a task that is still ongoing, and will result to a confidential report in the coming month. So in this, just a second, because I have a okay. So in this presentation, we're going to go through the trainings, a review on some previous eco-driving training efforts. What's the difference on eco-driving versus low-emission driving trainings? How we got from the guidelines to the trainings, and the user groups that will be covered, the aspects, and geographical coverage of trainings, and the next steps. So next one. Okay. So we did desktop research, which was conducted on previous training efforts by both EU funding projects and other initiatives such as Triatis, EcoEffect, EcoDriven, Civitas, also from STIB, the Brussels mobility organization, and Mobile in Germany, and others. So, and we noticed that there were quite positive results on fuel savings from 1% to 16.9%, which is huge, achieved. Also, a side effect of that was the road safety benefits, which were reduced by 22% in some cases. However, eco-driving is not the same with the low-emission driving. Eco-driving trainings are widely spread already across Europe. Most of the drivers and quite the professional ones are familiar with the techniques to reduce fuel consumption, and that's a challenge for us too. The newly introduced term of low-emission driving goes beyond the fuel savings and includes the impact of that driving behavior has on emissions such as the tire and brake. In this table, we can see that eco-driving covers only fuel consumption and exhaust emissions reduction, CO2. In that case, low-emission driving has indirect benefits, and of course combines some techniques and some training tips, but also has a quite important role on the exhaust emissions reduction, as Johannes said before, on the pollutant emissions, for example, the NOx, etc., the brake emissions and the tire emissions. Now, in the previous activity of the project, we had identified more than 30 concrete guidelines, which were categorized in this task in four categories: the pre-trip preparation and route choice, the driving category, and the maintenance, and some additional tips that are covering horizontally the whole driving behavior aspects. The guidelines were translated into concrete tips for drivers, taking into account some incentives and the impact of the behaviors, some costs or benefits of driving in a certain way, etc., etc. Now, the user groups that were considered and will be covered in the trainings are, first of all, professional and private drivers, professional drivers from taxis, light-duty vehicles, and heavy-duty vehicles will be trained and will be participate in the pilot sites. The trainings and guidelines will be adapted to the vehicle type in case of the professional drivers, and the roads driven. So it's different when there is a rural or an urban area, etc. The private drivers, which we will be a bit more flexible and not specific or difficult to follow guidelines, will be given. And of course, many aspects of the trainings will be included in the awareness campaigns with the principles of low emission driving and most easy or famous guidelines that can have an easy impact to the behavioral changes. Which aspects were covered? As I said before, pre-trip checks and planning is the first category before you get in the car or when you get in the car and before driving. Driving behavior is a main aspect, and training will be delivered on emission savings by changing the behavior. So, for example, no idling, the gear change, braking, accelerating, etc. Sorry for the typo. The proper maintenance, by maintaining the vehicle properly, emission savings can be achieved, and the use of the MODALES app, which will assist drivers by consulting them to drive environmentally friendly. Of course, MODALES, as we saw before from Andrew's presentation, covers all the aspects. In the trainings, we'll cover mostly the human factor, devices through the application training, and of course, some guidelines on how to maintain better the car, the vehicle, or in the best timing possible. Of course, how to save on brake and tire emissions, etc. Now the trainings will take place in all the pilot sites, which will be launched in the UK, Finland, Luxembourg, Spain, Italy, Greece, Romania, and Turkey, and will be done most probably virtually in all cases due to COVID, etc. In the end of the summer or autumn 2021. Now the next steps for us is to finalize the trainer manual. Then we will use this material to develop some videos for the virtual trainings, which was not planned at the beginning, but due to COVID, we anticipated this crisis, and we said, okay, it's an opportunity to do something virtual. We'll try to build some certification for the participants by MODALES, so to give some incentive for the drivers to finalize it and be focused on the trainings. And we will evaluate pre and post training on the low emission background and progress. As we said, there are professional drivers that have a lot of experience, and we're going to see in both cases what's the impact and the benefit on that. And of course, we will use the exploitation plan. We'll develop an exploitation plan for the training for after the project period. And that's all from my side.
Okay.
I can see we have a question.
Yes, there is. There is a question from Markku Ikonen asking why the brake emission minimisation was only on the low emission driving side. One important part of eco-driving is to minimise the use of brakes, which also minimises brake emissions. I'm not.
You mean on that?
I think we're talking about this one here. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I know some eco-driving activities I've been involved in did not really consider the brake, and it was only sort of based on fuel use. So maybe it depends which one. Maybe some other eco-driving applications are using the brake. So it could be that there is a small tick in the brake, in the eco-driving brake part. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, this is a generic presentation of things, and there are programs that involve more and more, but we cannot go into the detail for each program.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, aspects like that we can maybe discuss at the end of the session, differences between eco-driving and low-emission driving in the discussion part.
I think it's quite horizontal topics.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ted. We're a little bit ahead of the agenda, so I think this is good. We can now pass on to our colleagues in the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, who are taking some of the guidance that Ted summarised and making it into an application, a smartphone app, and it will start off with, well, two colleagues from Luxembourg. So the first one is Sebastian Fay. So he will do the first part, and then the app will be demonstrated by his colleague Ramiro. So please, Sebastian.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Well, as you say, my name is Sebastian Fay. I mainly have a background in wireless communication and mobile computing, and I'm working for the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, or let's say LIST, as a researcher. And the objective here in today's presentation is to give, let's say, a high-level overview of the mobile assistant for low-emission driving that is currently under development by LIST. So today we are two speakers, as you can see. I will first introduce what is the mobile assistant, again, a high-level overview, and then my colleague Ramiro will demonstrate the data collection module. I guess this is one of the most important modules that we have, well, let's say, developed so far, and I believe it's quite important for you for the audience to get an overview of this module. But first of all, I actually would like to spend a few minutes describing what are the existing standards for collecting data in vehicles. Well, as you can see, the overall picture is quite complex, so we'll not go into details, or well, we will not be ahead of time, I guess, after the end of this presentation. But on this slide, you can basically see that depending on the type of vehicle, the level of information needed, and well, even the model of the car or the type of vehicle, let's say, the information can be accessed through a set of various protocols. So if you want more information about these, there is a public deliverable that has been released. I think it was a few months ago. This is fully available on the project website. So I think it might be quite interesting for some of you who are not really familiar with OBD and all these protocols to get a bit more familiar with that if you're interested by low emission driving aspects. But well, in any case, the most important to keep in mind today is that, well, in the project, as already introduced by Andrew at the beginning, we will mainly consider OBD data, which are quite conventional and widely used already by well, various mobile applications, but also by well, external telematic boxes. So for those for those in the audience who are not really much familiar with OBD, it's simply a higher level protocol that can monitor a set of vehicle parameters. It's mainly dedicated to cars, but then of course for trucks we can also investigate the equivalent protocol, which is G1939. So in this project we are mainly focusing on OBD and for trucks on G1939. This is where we will collect, let's say, most of the data that are well available on these vehicles. So basically, most of the cars that are available today, well, if not all the cars, have an OBD interface. So if you use this interface, it's actually quite easy to collect data for instance, by using an OBD reader, as you can see here on the right part of the slide. These readers are usually not expensive, and there are already a large number of applications that well exist for analyzing your vehicle. And here you can see a few examples of metrics that can be collected. So for instance, using this kind of dongle, you can collect the vehicle identification number, which is quite useful to automatically recognize well, the different characteristics of your car if you are a developer, for instance. You can also get the speed, well, a few parameters about the acceleration, fuel consumption, and so on. So this is actually quite useful when you are developing this kind of you know, mobile assistant that well, is dedicated to low emission driving. So of course you cannot get all the metrics that are needed for low emission driving. There are many other metrics that are only managed by manufacturers, or that are simply not available through OBD. But at the very least, you can derive information about powertrain emissions, which is well, at least a starting point, let's say, for us in this project. So well, it's actually quite important to introduce all that, because the mobile assistant will make use of OBD data, and we will be developing two versions of it. So the first one will be somehow independent. We will not rely on any kind of OBD data and only use, let's say, simplified models. And the second one will be a bit more complex and relies on the OBD data, and will consider all these metrics you can see here. Not exactly all these metrics, but at least a part of them. So, well, one important message, maybe I will not go into details here. I guess this might be quite important and interesting for the audience as well. Actually, in this project, last year we spent some time specifying the characteristics of the OBD dongles to be used for the trials of MODALES. So we had to consider different types of connectivity. So, for instance, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, the impact of different sampling frequencies, and well, all the requirements that are needed by the models that are under development in the project. So, well, the key information here is probably the one that is described at the right of this slide. These are all the requirements that have been selected in this project. So I will not go and I will not describe all of them one by one. But yeah, I guess it will be possible to get access to these slides if you are interested by the topic. They will be available after the event. So yeah, and I also have to say that we are working on a public deliverable at the moment. It will be released soon, and it will describe the full methodology for selecting OBD dongles in the project. So in the case you are working on similar projects, or if you are interested by using this kind of hardware, I believe this might be quite useful to, well, let's say, at least get a few insights from this work. And now, well, the mobile assistant, which is probably the most interesting part of this presentation. So let's just start with an overview. I think that the first important aspect, we need to give more detail on that, is that we decided to go for a mobile application to understand the driving style of users and recommend the best actions to reduce their emissions. A mobile application is very simple to set up. Well, not so much simple, but I mean, it's a very conventional way of deploying a software, let's say, to the end users. And it's somehow, let's say, flexible and quite modular. So, but then, of course, in this project, this mobile application is ready to be considered as a kind of living research prototype. So basically, all the methods and guidelines that will be implemented in the app will be, I mean, it will be possible to generalize them to any kind of device. So, for instance, to well, the car interface, probably in the future. So here we are only using this mobile app as a way of implementing the methods and the methodologies that are defined in the project. And then all these will be developed through a dissemination and exploitation strategy at the end of the project. So it was quite important to mention that, because here we are not developing a final product. It's really a kind of platform that will be used during the project to validate the various hypotheses and collect the relevant data easily and through well, various users, as my colleagues will detail a bit later today. So on this slide, you can see the three main modules of this application. So first of all, we have a data collection module that will basically collect different user inputs, but also data from the smartphone sensors. So for instance, accelerometric or gyroscopic data, but also network traces. And then car data. So for that, we will use OBD dongles mainly. Then we have a data interpretation layer, which will basically convert all the raw data collected by the previous module into useful indicators. So the idea here is really to use artificial intelligence techniques directly on the device. So which means without or with only a limited internet connectivity. So for instance, we do not plan to use GPS data, but instead we will use new approaches based on network traces. So my colleague will talk about this a bit more just after my presentation. And then, well, of course, we have a data recommendation module to interact with the driver. So here we have two levels of information generated on the device and online. And we'll go back on that just after. And yeah, last but not least, the mobile application will be available in September on both Android and iOS. At least this is the expected delivery date. Next, and very quickly, here you can see a high-level interaction diagram of the app. So here you can basically find the three different modules I just described. And yeah, I mean, the first important point is that we are doing our best to minimize the need for an internet connectivity. I think it's quite useful when you are developing this kind of mobile application that will be then used in a car, when you have some trial sites like Luxembourg, where there are a lot of cross-border areas with a weak connectivity sometimes. So it was quite important to minimize the need for this kind of internet connectivity. Then it's also important to say that the mobile application will come together with what we call a web application, or let's say a web dashboard. The objective of this web dashboard that will be developed by CERT will be to aggregate anonymized information from the mobile app. So this is basically a way of showing statistical data to external stakeholders, and not only to the end users of the mobile application. Then we are obviously expecting a strong interaction with the driver. We are currently testing and implementing this, and this is basically also we are basically currently developing these three modules, and we are currently refining them through the project's preliminary experimentation campaigns. So I guess you will get more details on that just after. About the recommendations, just a few words. So the mobile application will basically generate two types of recommendations. So we are currently developing an engine that will manage these recommendations according to the actions that are performed by the user. The objective is really to try to combine all the project's knowledge about low emission driving and then guide the users in their driving choices. So, first of all, we will generate active recommendations. They will be provided in real time when the user is actually driving. So the idea here is to provide a real-time score to the user with a simplified interface, so as to not interact too much with him when driving. And this mechanism, as I just said, will be fully local. So we will compute this score directly on the mobile device, and we are currently investigating several options. So for instance, using a color code or some kind of game mechanism. So the color code, for instance, could change depending on the perception of the mobile assistant. This is something that we are currently investigating during the early trial phase of the project. And then we will also generate passive recommendations. So these passive recommendations will be sent after each driving section. And the objective here would be to generate a complete report using a more complex scoring system. So here, of course, we will consider OBD data, and we will also consider contextual data. So for instance, the traffic index and the weather. And here we will also rely on a simulator to reproduce a few dynamics that cannot be deduced only with OBD. So the system is also under development by our colleagues from Okan University. I'm almost reaching the end of the presentation, but I just want to show you a few more details about the web interface that will be developed together with the mobile application. So it's also currently being developed. The release date is planned for September as well. And here the objective is really to make this web platform available to at least to local authorities, and we will see if we have or if we extend this platform to other stakeholders. But as I told you before, the objective is really to make aggregated data and statistical information available. So for instance, a comparison of vehicle emissions versus the vehicle type or the road type or the user profile and so on. And yeah, just before closing this presentation, but definitely I will not go into details, I would just like to show you this figure. I think it's quite important to mention that today. You probably all know that there are already a lot of mobile applications that are available on the market and that have been proposed already by research communities. So one of the first exercise we actually did was to benchmark the most popular ones. So we basically referenced 26 applications, and it was interesting to see that 4 clusters can actually be created based on the characteristics of this application. So for instance, here, depending on the service level and type. On our side, what we propose is quite different because we integrate low emission driving models and not only eco driving models, which means that we are not only focused on CO2 impact. So in any case, this slide will be shared, and this will also be published in a next report in the project. So you will get access to this kind of detail. But now I guess I'm reaching the end of my presentation. So that's all from my side. That was a really high-level introduction of this mobile application. We will use it in this project as a research platform to collect driving data. I think this is the most important message. And to go further, I just pass the floor to my colleague Ramiro, who is also a researcher at least, and who is mainly in charge of this mobile computing aspects and of the mobile app development. So, well, Ramiro, I guess the floor is yours.
Hello. Let me see if I can share the screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Sebastian. So this part of the presentation is a bit different. I would like you to pay attention for some minutes to the camera first. I wanted to describe briefly how do we work here, at least for the MODALES project, and show you the devices we use. Here I have an example, I don't know if you can see it, of an OBD dongle. This in particular is in an OBD Link MX Plus. And well, what does it do? This part of the device goes connected to the vehicle, this part here, to a port that's usually placed in different parts of the car depending on the manufacturer and the model of the car, but could be next to the driver's seat, to the steering wheel, and so on. And this device requests diagnosis information to the vehicle. Sebastian showed a list of different things that you can request. That, for example, you can ask for the speed of the vehicle, the current speed. Then how do you get this information? Well, you can connect it with a mobile phone, or any kind of like a device with Bluetooth. But of course, for development, let's say in the office, or well, now working from home here at my home, it will be not very convenient to have an actual car with me at all times. So that's why we use an emulator, this other device here. It's a Freematics OBD2 emulator. This port here is the same one that you can find in a vehicle. So then you can connect the OBD dongle to the emulator, and on the other end of the emulator, you can connect with a USB cable, like a printer cable, to a computer. So with this emulator, you can trick the OBD dongle into thinking that's connected into an actual car, and you can define like with a software, for example, what's the current speed of a fake car. So I will connect it right now. So it's not an actual car, but it's, well, a fake vehicle that I can control with my computer. And now I will try to show on my screen, if possible, here. This is, well, the last part of is the mobile phone. I have an Android phone that I have connected to my computer. This is a Samsung. But also, as Sebastian mentioned, that is also to be able to execute this also in iOS, so in iPhones or iPads. That's why we are using Flutter to develop the application, which is a framework, like a set of tools developed by Google that allows us to use the same code base for both platforms. So we don't need to spend extra time coding for different platforms. Okay, so here I will show you in the screen This is my actual phone in real time. I would like to remind you that this is the first stage of the development that we are focusing only in data collection for now. We are not giving yet any actual recommendations for low emission driving, just data collection. So this is a very simple interface that you would have to put your phone in a phone holder in your car, so it stays in the same place at all times. And then when you turn on the engine and you plug in the OBD dongle to your car, you press start here, and then it just will start collecting data from the OBD dongle and the different sensors from the cell phone. Here at the top, it's now showing that the OBD dongle is actually connected, so you need to configure it first, but right now I'm just showing it like for simplicity that it auto connects to the OBD link. And here is the information of your car in case of you have different cars or even trucks. And then when you finish the trip, you just press stop, and eventually this data will be synchronized with our service at list. So this is the simple part. I wanted to show you some of the details. There is a lot of configuration that's completely optional, but this is more about the data collection. For example, we collect some manually imputed data from the user, but it's not very sensitive. Just is some data for statistics. For example, gender, the age, the use of the vehicle, the driving experience, and some I need to link the application to questionnaires that we send to the users. Also, as I mentioned, you could have more than one vehicle, and here is the garage where you have all your vehicles. You can change the vehicles. There is a lot of information that you could fill manually, but also the idea is if you have the vehicle identification number, you can fill this form manually, and it could be possible to retrieve from different databases the rest of the information from your car. For example, the manufacturer, the category of the car, the fuel type, and so on. The user could fill all this manually too. But the other alternative is to extract the vehicle identification number with the OBD dongle, which is sometimes possible. Not every car implements this functionality. Like everything with the OBD dongle, usually it's optional. Not a lot of information is standardized through all the cars. Like I think that the ones that are pretty much reliable are the vehicle speed and the engine speed, but the rest are usually optional. And besides that, you have also the way you synchronize with the server. Right here, I'm synchronizing manually. You can use Wi-Fi and mobile data. We give different options. Also, how often do you want to synchronize with the server and so on. Like, of course, all these options, they have default values, so to make the life easier for the user. You could clear all your data if you don't want to participate for some reason. Well, the OBD dongle configuration, so you need to pair the dongle with Bluetooth and so on. And then I wanted to talk a bit about the sensors of the phone. So there are several things we can use: the accelerometer, Bluetooth, GPS, gyroscope, the OBD dongle, and Wi-Fi. Several things to say here. Of course, you can turn them off and on, but by default, they are all on. About the GPS, that's important. The GPS, well, it's sensitive information, but for this first part, that it's an internal data collection, we use the GPS, let's say, as a ground truth. So to compare what we have in other sensors with an extra sensor to give us like more certainty about what we're doing. But the idea is not to store GPS data about anybody in our servers. But the GPS also gives you speed. That's also something useful, and it's not that sensitive, let's say. And why all these sensors if maybe the speeds from the GPS is enough sometimes? Because for low emission driving, usually you're interested in acceleration, and that's one of the main indicators. But of course, we need more sensors for mostly for redundancy. GPS usually sometimes fails, right? You go through a tunnel, it fails. Then the sensor from the mobile device, sometimes they are not very reliable if the device is not positioned very well in the phone holder, and so on. Like, so with a bit more of redundancy, maybe we have more certainty about what we are measuring. And some other interesting things, like as I think Sebastian mentioned briefly, with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, we can measure how many other devices or hotspots are around. That can give you an approximation of density of population or cars, for example, like how many other users you have around can give you an indication of traffic jams, or if you're in the middle of a city, or if you're in the middle of nowhere, for example. So there are several challenges here, like how to use all this data. That's optional. The OBD dongle can, maybe some users don't have it. They just want to use it, the application just with the sensors, or some of the sensors sometimes fail, like GPS, as I mentioned, and so on. Like, there are challenges there to synchronize all this. Also, all these sensors, they go at different sampling rates because of physical reasons, like physical limitations. So you need to synchronize all this. What else can we do with the data? Well, just to give you an example, for example, here in this slide, I'm showing some actual data we collected already with internal data collection campaigns. This is the speed distribution for different vehicles. And on the y-axis, we see some strange numbers. Those are like internal identification of vehicles, so it's anonymized, so we don't know who these vehicles are. But we have the speed for all their trips, and we can see, like, the first and the last one, for example, they might be going at higher speeds because they are on a highway, for example, and the others are lower speeds because they are on the city. And maybe this one that is like completely compressed here is maybe there was an error there, maybe GPS was not working, and so on. So we can use this both for, let's say, debugging for development to know if things are going well or not, but also we can get nice insights about other things in general, like how users behave, and maybe more specific information about one vehicle and one trip. Here we have across time for one trip how the GPS was measuring speed, and this is the shadow is the certainty of the sensor. It can also tell you how certain it is that was the actual speed. So sometimes it's more certain, and sometimes it's like when it's wider, it's not very sure what was the actual speed. So yeah, that was most of it. So these are all the elements we use. And of course, it's not only about the development of the application, but all the different things that we can do with all this data, and all the things that we can get with the machine learning, with artificial intelligence, like estimate things that we don't have because some sensors are not working, or getting new insights like behavior from users that we were not expecting. And well, we have many challenges ahead, and as Sebastian mentioned, in September we should have the next version with the recommendations. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramiro. Excellent, thank you. There is one question that maybe one of you can answer, maybe Sebastian, if you're still there. Yes. So Guido Gielan from FIA had a question: is driver distraction prevented while driving with the app? maybe say a word or two about it?
Yeah, I can take this one. I guess as I mentioned, this application is a research prototype dedicated to low emission driving. So in any case, the first priority we have is really to develop and validate these models first, and then see the impact on the driver, not to make a commercial application or to focus on driver distraction. But that being said, of course we had to consider this aspect, and this is actually why the final interface of the application that will be presented to the user while driving will really be simplified, so that it doesn't distract him. So I was referring to a color coding mechanism, but we also have other things in mind. And in any case, it will be less distracting than a navigation system, for instance. As far as I remember, this is also something that we will check when recruiting the participants, if they are used or not to use the mobile application in general. So yeah, we are considering this aspect, yes, in short.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So if there are any other questions about that aspect, it can maybe be covered in the final session. So we're moving almost exactly on time to the last presentation of the first session. So this is Joan Domingo from RAC, the Royal Catalan Automobile Club, or ACASA, which is their operating arm, and he will talk about the on-road trials with real users, this is mostly coming up in the future. We're working on the ramp-up phase at the moment. So Joan, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Do you see the screen now?
Yes, it's good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. So my name is Joan Domingo. I work at RICC Mobility Club based in Barcelona. I have a background in geography and urban planning, and since 3-4 years ago, I started to work in sustainable mobility. So I will present you how we plan to organize these trials with real users using our app and the training. So first of all, I would like to present 7 cities in Europe in which we will recruit users and ask them to drive with our application, and also the training that is being developed for this project. And they are all 7 cities in different areas of Europe, different weather, different geographical characteristics, and different culture. So one of the purposes of our these trials is to see how different users react in different places and different situations. The main purpose of this, the on-road trials, is to validate if the MODALES app and the training are really able to change, to modify the driving behavior, and also to identify in which groups this application has more impact. If it's related to the age, if related to the city, related to the driving experience, and also what is the user acceptance about this app. Is one of the aspects, for instance, will be if this app is too distracting or not. And also we want to see what is the capacity of this app to reduce emissions while driving. So for the methodology, first we need to select users. We want to be users external to the team that is working in MODALES, and we have a local partner in each of the cities in which those trials are being organized, and we will recruit these users through the local partners network. We also designed a selection questionnaire in which we ask the users some questions about the user profile, such as the age group, the gender, their attitudes toward using smartphones, and if they are used or not to use navigation applications, for instance. Also the driving profile, what frequency they drive, what is the purpose of their drivings, what kind of roads they usually drive on. If they are driving rural areas, in more urban or using the motorway, because we want to have very different situations, very different profiles. And also we ask some main characteristics of the car because all cars are accepted, but we focus in Euro 3, 4, and 5, which for the purposes of Modales are the cars that can read OBD dongle and also have maintenance issues. But of course, we also accept newer cars and also all kinds of fuels. Basically, the majority will be fuel and diesel, but we are open to any other fuel as well. And also with this, we took carefully all the aspects related to data privacy. For instance, the GPS data, how is not going to be stored. For that, we communicate the users we want to recruit about how the data is flowing. We ask them to sign a consent form to use this data for the analysis. We have a local partner, a local data management officer in each city. And also one of the things is that we anonymize the data. The local partner is the only one who really knows the identity of each user. The local partner provides identity number that is stored in the app, and all the data goes with this number, not with the name or the contact details. And then the main data collection tools used during these trials is the app itself. It works, as Ramiro showed, as a data collection module, having a lot of sensors that help to define the driving style and the situation in which this driving is happening. We also use OBD dongles. We will provide users to OBD dongles to complement the data. And we are sending questionnaires to those users. So first, the selection questionnaire, we had the basic questions to see if these users were to ensure the validity of users. Then we have a baseline questionnaire that goes more in deep in the attitudes and the user profile. And we will send also a final evaluation questionnaire, which will focus more in the user acceptance, and we will see that if the app was, for instance, helpful, annoying, distracting, or really helpful for them. And also we open a communication channel with those users, with the local partners, so they can communicate with each local partner if they have any problem, if they have questions or they don't understand some of the questionnaires. And that also gives that feedback if the app is easy to use. So first, there are several activities in those trials. Basically, 3 activities. First is the ramp up, which is ongoing now. It started last month and it's happening. It's going to finish now. This is like a small pilot of the trial, and it's only happening in Barcelona and Luxembourg with a smaller number of users. 9 participants recruited in Barcelona and 10 users recruited in Luxembourg. And in this phase, the app is only working as a collection model. So the app is not yet sending any recommendation to any of the users. The equipment for this ramp-up phase or ramp-up activity is the app itself, as I said, only as a collection module. And some users in Luxembourg are using also the OBD. So we still didn't have all the OBDs that we need for all the participants. So in Barcelona, we are not using any OBD, only the sensors from the app. But in Luxembourg, some of the users are also using the OBD. And the purpose basically of this ramp up is to test the collection model of the app, to get also feedback about those users, if the app is easy to use, if they have some questions, some things they don't understand, or some things are not working. And we have time to fix it. In Luxembourg, they have time to fix it before starting the large scale trials with more users. Also, we want to test the recruitment process we designed, the questionnaires we did. If all the questions there are too long or too difficult, easy to reply, they all give that feedback about that. And also, we want to explain this data flow we design, the consent forms we ask them to to sign, and to check with the local data management officers if all the process that we design is okay with the law. Then the second activity, which is going to happen this summer, is a large-scale user trial. In that case, all the cities I presented, the 7 cities in Europe, will participate. With a larger number of users, we expect around 30 passenger cars at each site to be recruited. As the users in the ramp-up, they didn't receive any recommendation, any training yet. They can repeat if they want, but they don't have to. They can be totally different users. And we will include also professional drivers. Can be taxi drivers, light-duty vehicles, or heavy-duty vehicles. The number of each kind of vehicle will be lower because it's easier to recruit passenger drivers, but also we want to recruit trucks and vans and taxis. And this activity will be divided into phases that I will explain later. One is the baseline, in which basically the drivers will keep driving without any recommendation, only with the app as a data collection module. And then after the second phase, they will start receiving first the training we design, and second, they will start receiving these recommendations from the app. And the last and third activity about the trials is the data analysis that will happen after we collect all the data, and it's going to happen next year. So the first phase for the large-scale user trials is the baseline. As I said, this is very similar than the ramp-up phase, but with a larger number of users and in larger number of cities doing it. And in this phase, the participants, they keep driving without any feedback from the app, without any recommendation, with no training, and they drive naturally. We didn't give them any instruction. They have to do their own normal trips. But the difference is that all of them will have an OBD dongle in addition to the app as a collection module. And the purpose of this baseline is to analyze the driving profile when these users are not receiving any recommendation. When they drive in their own style, as Johanny explained in the first presentation. Then we will move to the second phase, in which those users first will receive the training that is being developed, and also they will start receiving recommendations, active and passive recommendations from the app. In this second phase, it's important the users have to be the same as the phase number 1. In that case, we have to compare how the user was driving before and after starting receiving recommendations. The equipment will be the same. The app will keep working as a collection module, the OBD dongle as well. And the only thing is that the application will start sending recommendations to the users, and also the training that will be given at the beginning of the phase. And the main purpose of this second phase is to analyze the driving profile of the same user when they start receiving data, so then we can compare. We can compare and see if that user really changed, if the app really helped to change the behavior. So as for the users, we are using the media, the local partner networks. But if in the audience today there are some companies, they have, I don't know, delivery companies, they have a fleet and they would be interested in participating, you are also welcome to join our trial. I think for the company it has some benefits. Your drivers will have some training and driving support. You will get data about your driver's driving behavior. We will promote your logotype in our website, and we will disseminate results. For instance, we have Heineken has joined recently for Italy. They will be part of this trial as well. and just contact me. Here you have my contact details, and I will organize with the local partner if you are interested. So please don't hesitate to ask me any question if you are interested. And I think that's all for me. It was pretty quick. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And we are right on time. There was one question which I gave a first answer to written, but maybe either Joan or Sebastian, if you're there, you might want to deal with it as well. It's from Paul Tilanus from TNO, asked, how do you deal with privacy issues such as the home of the user, the domicile of the user? So, yeah, you said before that it was...
Sorry, Andrea, I had some audio problems. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, it was a question about privacy issues. So how do we deal with, not knowing where the user lives? So you did say before that it will be anonymized, and I also just put in the response that although in the ramp up we're using GPS and tracking a few internal people, in the main trials we will not use GPS, so we won't see where they go. I don't know if either Sebastian or Joan, you want to add anything on privacy?
No, I think that's it. I mean, yeah, only the local partner will know the identity, the contact details. And for instance, in Barcelona, I am responsible for that, and I will not be analyzing data. So
Okay.
there is no link with their personal behavior and their personal data.
Yeah, just to add maybe more information on top of that. Well, actually, we will consider the private data separately from the driving data. So as Joan said, well, we will collect all the private data will be collected by locally by the trial site leaders. So this, I mean, there is a strict management of the data that will be done here. And then from the mobile application perspective, we will not collect any kind of private data. So we will not collect GPS, we will not collect any kind of sensitive data here. So this is already separated. And then we have a unique identification number, anonymized as well, that basically links the private data to the mobile app data. So I'm not sure if it's clear, but this is, well, this is managed basically. And I think it was already clear in Joan's presentation.
Okay, thank you. So maybe if we have time in the end, we can maybe say more about the privacy side. So we are on time for a short coffee break. If you wish to stay looking at your screen or while getting a drink or something, Juhani will show a short video on the lab work that has been done in VTT. So I pass Juhani the screen. You can watch this and get a drink or something, and we come back at 10:50 for the second session. So thank you. I'll pass to Juhani. Sure.
Do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, let's start. So this video is about how we test cars in laboratory conditions. You can see that there are a lot of screens and a lot of computers to collect data or to control any of the subsystems that are used. Here we have the particulate mass emission collection, where we have 4 different filters, and we have a separate unit for particulate numbers. And in this particular work, we are comparing the PEMS systems with the full-size in-laboratory CVS systems. And so we performed a test run and measure the emissions using both of these analyzing equipment, both the onboard system as well as the full laboratory scale. And as you see, the vehicle remains stationary, but the driving wheels are on rollers that are connected to electrical generators or motors that can simulate the resistive forces of the vehicle as it would be driven on a road. And the car thinks that it's been driven like on a road, and it produces similar tape-up emissions. So this was just a short introduction to in-laboratory testing.
So the second session will be chaired by our work package leader dealing with OBD retrofits, tampering and inspection. It's Dimitri Margaritis from CERT, the Hellenic Institute of Transport in Thessaloniki. So I'll pass the floor to him. Dimitri, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi.
I think you see my screen now.
Yes.
So, yes, okay.
Please, off you go.
So, I don't know if everyone is back, we can start. My name is Dimitri Margaritis, and as Andrew said, I'm the work package leader 4, which deals with the tampering, with inspection, retrofitting, and also investigating the potentials of OBD, how to deliver data, and also what we could propose for, let's say, more advanced data that could be traced through the canvas. All these interesting things that will be discussed by a group of very good friends and colleagues. So I will start first with the data access from the OBD, which is a joint work with several other partners, and more specifically with LIST, which is leading this task. We look further with about the simulation of retrofits. You can imagine that retrofits cannot be treated in a limited project of 3 years, only with real world testing and real, let's say, demonstrators. We need also to have simulations. And this is, let's say, addressed and handled by Hypo 10 from the University of Leeds. Then we have Arno and Berla from Provencia, who is going to discuss about their demonstrator that they've developed, or also co-developed with also other projects, and the real-world testing that they've done. Then we move back to me discussing about tempering and inspection, how we, let's say, we look to from the technical aspect point of view. And then we end up with September, who is working for Spark's legal network. And then Esther will discuss about the legal framework, what is at the moment, and also in the future we will look how we could modify, or let's say propose some recommendations for future changes.
Dimitri, can you put the presentation in presentation mode?
Yes, now I can put it.
Okay.
Right. Now we start with my presentation regarding the data access on board diagnostics. After doing all the work with the OBD, of course, most of us have worked with OBD using a dongle, but we haven't deepened so much in the protocol and also problems that might arise. We realized that there are several dongles and many variants of models. Mainly the difference is the access, the interface, the access interface, which can be the Bluetooth, can be also the cellular, the Bluetooth cellular, the RS-232. That's some examples. There's, as I said, a huge number of dongles in the market, and these are based on the ELM 327 chipset, or they provide compatibility to the commands of this chip. Here we see a list that our colleagues from LIST have created, looking into several OBD dongles and some, let's say, more reliable companies that they are known in the market. You see the OBD Link, Primetics, CSS Electronics, So as you see, there are several. This can be connected through, let's say, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, or even having their own memory card on it. So after all the work that our colleagues done, there has been a selection criteria table. Sebastian's already told you about the selection criteria for MODALES. This is more general. It's a kind of recommendation for someone who would like to use an OBD dongle as we did in a naturalistic based study. More or less what we do in MODALES is a kind of naturalistic driving. Of course, there are certain protocols that should be supported. Another important issue is the voltage, which may differ for passenger cars and trucks. The connectors, also is something that we're looking at, of course, depending on the vehicle. I mean, heavy trucks or the passenger vehicles. The interfaces, some features that they are not common. However, it could be useful if you don't use a mobile device, a smartphone, like the GPS or the G-force accelerometer. So you have a kind of data logger integrated in a small device like a dongle. All of them should provide information through a JSON or, let's say, CSV file. And of course, it would be interesting if you have the capabilities to develop further software to have this opportunity through the dongle. So there should be an API and further develop it. So when we tried to get info from the data, we had the question, okay, how many data we can get, and is the data set same for all vehicles? Because looking into the protocol of OBD, you see a huge list of information, but at the end you don't get it. And especially in our case for MODALES, it's really important when we develop the software that will provide recommendations. There should be a common set of data, and in as many as possible, as much as possible, detail. So the colleagues from LIST created a Python software that it can request the PIDs, the available PIDs, and then we can have some statistics about the total number, which of them are specific for emissions, very important, and the other about the vehicle age, the type of engine, the average time of response, the distribution, the frequency, and so on. So we try to create a kind of library in order to be prepared when we will develop the application, actually not the application, but the recommendations, and which data will be available at the end. So if the OBD gate is comprehensive as a source, a comprehensive source of data, we see that the OBD purpose, the OBD covers a subset, so there could be more data available through the canvas. The other problem is that the OEMs have not a standard. It's not a common standard for using the, let's say, the canvas information. Each of them have a different one. The OBD is relevant for cars, for vans, but moving into the heavy-duty vehicles, then we have a different architecture of standards. Then let's say we thought also, we have described it in the proposal, to crack messages in order to get extra info, and then to have a larger sample of parameters to monitor better the emission levels, the maintenance, tampering, and at the end, of course, to have to specify the driving pattern of vehicle user. But then we have the question of how legal is tracking. Of course, not legal, especially when we interfere with the good performance of the vehicle, and there are safety aspects. I have here an example of a book that you can find on the internet, the Car Hacker's Handbook. So it's something in between. And of course, instead of going into cracking, there should be a more extensive set available by the manufacturers in order to proceed to such work as we do here. How vulnerable is then the OBD for tampering? We will discuss it also later. For the OBD welfare suppressors, which work is to erase the codes from the memory. So an anti-tampering solution, actually an anti-tampering procedure is to prevent clearing the crossing trouble codes. A solution for that is also advised by DIAS or DIAS, and I have to make a reference to this project, which is a kind of a brother project supervised by the same project officer. Our colleagues there are going really into depth about how to let's say to look into anti-tampering solutions. We are looking more to soft measures. They are looking into hard measures, software and hardware. And they have really done a lot of work and very interesting work, both testing in a real environment and a simulation environment. So we could say that setting a permanent fault, so not giving the possibility for deleting the messages, logging, another solution is logging and reporting the faults, and also changing the frequency of the reset for the faults. And this is it. And I think if there are any questions, I can answer it now, or maybe we can move to the next presentation.
Okay. I'm Haibo Chen. I'm going to present some work on simulation of retrofits with my colleague Jianming Gao. So basically, we have heard today a lot about the importance of driving behavior to low emissions. But what we also wanted to look at is, you know, that how much the driver can do. Once the engine started, fuel will be consumed, and the vehicle will take you from A to B. So in terms of emissions, what else can we do apart from you know, training and teaching the driver how to drive? So this is the focus of my presentation, and later on, colleagues Arno at Prevention were talking about the real-world test of retrofit as well. I just want to say that we exchange retrofits with after treatment because really it's about the NOx control technologies. So if the vehicle doesn't have that, so you can call it is a retrofit device, but the new vehicle can be equipped with a similar or even the same device from the manufacturer. So this is why you might see that these two terminologies appears on my slides. So this is the MODALES methodology for NOx retrofit study. I already mentioned that on the one hand, we have a real-world test of retrofit system, and on the other hand, we have a simulation ready. As you know that the real-world test really give you ground truth data, and then is performed under the real world conditions. So what real impact of vehicle emissions on air quality, personal exposure, and health, that really provide the real situation to you. But on the other hand, it's quite expensive task and time consuming as well. And whatever we do, we are limited to the number of or type of vehicles we can test, and the traffic conditions, environmental conditions, and also we are limited to how many drivers we can get on board as well. So all this will add to the limitation to the real-world test. And on the top of that, even everything's right, is okay, but the data quality is still affected by many factors, including the setup of the system, instrumentation conditions, and the calibration, and so on. So we thought that MODALES, given that the MODALES consortium have extensive experience with traffic models, understand how the traffic conditions impact on emissions, and then we have experts in the team to look at the driving behavior simulations, understand how drivers or different drivers behave under different traffic conditions, environment conditions. So we thought that we can bring this to, based on this tool, we can build vehicle model, including after treatment system, as you can see, to reduce carbon dioxide and to reduce particles. And this slides, this presentation focus on the reduction of or control of NOx emissions by equipment technologies like SCR and ACCT. So we started just to look at what are potential retrofit technologies for NOx control out there. And we look at the different categories, different type of technology here. As you can see, the first three is look at how to generate gaseous ammonia to reduce NOx. And then the number 4 is how to prevent the heat losses. You can, because the exhaust temperature is very important for the efficiency of the after treatment devices. So there's technologies to look at how to increase exhaust temperature 5 and 6, and then you can have another technology to absorb and store NOx, and then convert it to harmless pollutant, harmless elements by converting NOx into this kind of like the O2, for example, hydrogen. Nitrogen. So we look at the efficiencies of these technologies, and also we look at their response time. We look at whether they consume fuel, which is we call it the energy penalty. We also look at the practical aspects like complexity, affordability, adaptability, and see what they can do for the NOx control. Given the limited time and budget, in this project, we only look at the first two, which is the SCR, which is probably the only one commercially available. But also on the top of that, we look at the newer technology called the ACCT, developed by Loughborough University. This is what my presentation about. So this is just to give you some idea about what vehicle simulation modeling work we have been doing this project. So as you can see, we have this vehicle, and then the driving behavior will provide input to this vehicle. The vehicle have the different fuel sources into the equation. We consider environmental conditions, and then at the end of the day, we look at the efficiency of after treatment, as shown at the bottom over here. So after we have selected the NOx control technologies to simulate, and then calibrate them against as much the real data as possible, and then we come to this comparison here. So what we are showing here, this is really the driving cycle of WLTC. The red one is to show the performance efficiency of ACCT, this new technology. Then the benchmark one is SCR. As you can see at the beginning, when the vehicle is warming up, efficiency is really, it's not the let off this the retrofit device not really doesn't let off yet. So efficiency is not really there. And then once they started to kick in, then you can see the efficiency is increasing. There's an interesting bit here. While one technology performs really well, another one is struggling to control NOx emissions. Really, we refer this one to really the crucial temperature around the let-off threshold. But overall, I've got to say that once the retrofit kicks in, especially for the warm-up period after the warm-up, and also maintain good exhaust temperature. The retrofits, both retrofits perform very well. So because the exhaust temperature is so important, so how important is it? And this is on the, as you can see this diagram, and this is the exhaust parts here. You have a DOC, DPF in the middle, and then the NOx control parts in the end. That is the current layout. We call it the normal layout. Then this is the simulation of the CO emission and HC plus NOx emission, and then NOx emission alone as a sort of a reference values to compare. So what we tried here is we just look at whether we put SOC in a different place would have impact on NOx emissions. So the first layout we tried is to put this number 3 in the middle of between the number 1 and the number 2 in the middle. So that is the emission value we got, and then we put the NOx control device right after the engine, which is the moving to the first position. The emission, the NOx emission, reduce even further. So compare, normal layout and layout 2. Really, we can halve the NOx emissions by putting the retrofits in a different place. We tried this layout with the new technology ACCT. As you can see, first of all, ACCT, generally speaking, perform better, at least based on the simulated results, better than the SCR in all situations. And the layout 2 of ACCT, moving ACCT right in the beginning, the NOx emissions reduce substantially. All this, I got to say that still, if you look at the Euro 6 emission standards, all this layout actually produce the values within the emission limit below the threshold. And if this can be replicated in the real situation, probably the ACCT technology could do very well with the newer standards, Euro 7, for example. So this is what we are presenting here is we look at the relationship between the NOx emission rates versus the vehicle power, which is needed to take you from A to B anyway. So there's not very much you can do about it. If after treatment can do a good job to control the NOx, and then we can actually address the eco-driving, low emission driving without compromising on safety altogether. So this is the methodology actually MODALES focuses a lot. So what I show here is, first of all, the first diagram on the left side shows you the relationship between emission rates versus vehicle power, or the emission rates without after treatment. What this is, if there's no exhaust pipeline, then this is the emissions you would get from the vehicle. As you can see, they correlated very well. If we have the after treatment, what's the NOx emission rate? As you can see, compare with this one on the same scale, NOx emissions can be controlled by the after treatment system. The middle figure includes cold start, which we already say that both retrofits we tested, we simulated, struggled with the beginning of the journey, which is a cold start period. After that, if we take this cold start emissions out of this figure, then what you can see on the right side is the after warm up, what the vehicle would produce the NOx emissions. So as you can see, if after treatment NOx control technology device works well, they can knock out all these high values of NOx. So what lessons we learned? What conclusions we can draw from a simulation? Retrofits is really useful and efficient to reduce NOx emissions. If under the ideal situation conditions, we can actually look at the driving behavior for other crucial things like eco-driving, safety, but still, if after treatment it's not very efficient, or somehow there's a misfunctioning or something like tempering or so on, then what we will get from the vehicle is the engine out emissions. So still, we needed to concentrate on other aspects like driving behavior and tempering and anti-tempering measures and policy preventions to do all this together. The low exhaust temperature is still an issue for this too, but as you can see earlier, there's other technologies which works very well for low exhaust emission temperatures. Maybe we can put them together. If you wanted to find further information, we already published one scientific paper in the Journal of Cleaner Production. It's already published, and then the journal invited us to submit another paper which is under review. I think we still need to look at the performance of the retrofit in a real situation. I'm hoping that Arno will give you a lot of this kind of knowledge in a minute. We need to look at how this retrofit performs when the engine off at the traffic lights. You know the vehicles do that, and in the traffic jam, cold start, and also we need to look at how all the vehicles performs, especially hybrid vehicles where the engine is not used up and running all the time. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Sorry, I overrun a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much, Jaimo. We know how hard it is to let's say put all to press all this information within 15 minutes, and there's still much work to be done. Thank you very much. I don't know if there are any questions that Jaimo could answer now. I will look into the questions.
I don't see any questions, so I think we
go. Yeah. So let's say as presenter now, Arno. Again, thank you very much, Jaimo. Arno, you are now the presenter.
Right. My presentation is about NOx emission analysis of diesel-powered buses. I'm Arno Amberla from Proventia, and this is about retrofitted diesel buses, so not passenger cars or vans included.
Arno, please, if you can maximize your presentation, because we see that in the...
Okay, just a second. Do you see now in presentation mode, page number 2, with the buses?
It's a little bit different mode, but okay, don't waste your time, please go on.
All right. So we have done analysis of retrofitted buses with online emission measurement, monitoring, telemetry. So a couple of results from the analysis and some key findings from our work. In generally, the retrofit system we are talking about here is about AdBlue NOx conversion. So target is to reduce nitrogen oxides and also particulates with DPF. And applications are for city buses operated mainly on city areas. From the telemetry, we can get results from hour-based results going further on second by second, and also we have a link where the vehicle has been driving through those times. In this analysis, we have included articulated buses, double-decker buses, and solo buses. And totally 1,673 buses are included in the analysis. These are operating in Finland, Norway, Germany, and UK, mainly in London area. Here are a couple pictures of the buses and of the aftertreatment. The aftertreatment itself has DOC, DPF, and SCR, so it is the similar technology which is widely used on Euro 6 buses. And originally these buses have been Euro 4 or 5 emission levels. So they already had a couple of, or mostly they have had already SCR, but due to the low temperatures and different kind of let's say, focusing on cycles, they have not been performing too well on the city levels, city driving. From the analysis, we have seen that certain vehicles are, as an average, working very well, more than 90–95% NOx reduction over the whole time, including cold start, hot start, and everything. On the other hand, a couple of vehicles have not been that good ones, and surprisingly, they have been hybrids. So a couple of hybrid vehicles have had less than 80% average NOx reduction over the time. And that is linked on driving speed, which is then further on linked on exhaust gas temperature. And also on those hybrid vehicles, we can see that the emission baseline from the engine is extremely high. We are talking about 20–25 grams per kilometer as a baseline engine out emissions, and we have been able to reduce that to 5 grams or even 1 gram per kilometer or less. In generally, we, as mentioned, hybrids were not performing too well, and there's a direct correlation to driving speeds. So the hybrids, they typically are having the slowest driving speeds of all these vehicles. That's partly because of the fleet management system. So hybrids are put on inner city driving where the driving speeds are the lowest ones. So that has influence on the emission performance as well. Then there is discussion of how these systems are working on cold ambience and warm ambience, and we see from these vehicles rather straight correlation. So if the ambient temperature changes 10 degrees C, about 10 degrees C change on the exhaust gas temperature. So it goes roughly 1:1. And also we have seen from certain vehicles when the system has been faulty for reason or another, then the emissions are extremely high over that time of period. So tampering and fixing the vehicles which are not working well or not working at all is crucial in the whole big picture. What we can see here as a conclusion is that retrofitting is an effective way to reduce the emissions, but it needs the temperature. And ambient temperature, exhaust gas temperature have this direct correlation, what I mentioned earlier. So in this study, the Euro 5 hybrids, they were more operated really in the inner city. Right now, as we are looking the data we are collecting all the time, we see that electrification of city traffic and the buses, those electric buses are moved on the inner city routes. And then these Euro 5s, retrofitted vehicles and hybrid buses, they are moving to a bit further away from the inner city, which increases the driving speeds, increases the temperature, and improves the efficiency of our retrofit systems. So as a traditionally, we think that retrofit system or any after treatment system is losing a bit of its efficiency over time, but in these cases, especially on the hybrids, we are seeing the system is improving over the time because the changes on the operation. Thank you. That was my presentation. Do we have time for questions?
Thank you very much, Arno. Being also on time, even though there's also Heibo, you have many things to present. I don't see any question. I don't know if you, Andrew. So
I don't see any questions, no. But maybe
moving very fast.
At the end, we can do it later.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arno.
Then you can see my screen.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. Now we move to the fourth presentation. The title of this presentation is Tempering and Inspection and looking into the technical aspects, and later on Esther will follow with the legal ones. Looking to the literature and also looking to several sources on the internet, we realize that the maintenance issues are really it's really huge. So in what we found for US, about 80% of the vehicles on the road, they have service let's say issues, and there has been an indication by the car, but no one has taken care of it. And for US again, that translates into 160 million vehicles, which is really amazing. And you see at the end of the page about an example of maintenance issues or failures, actually issues during the inspection for commercial vehicles. And you see a large list for each system of the vehicle, which can be the body type, can be safety, lighting, glass, and we highlight with green those related to the tailpipe testing. And yeah, it's a variety. It can be also from the catalytic converter missing or let's say removal. It can be spark plug, can be the EGR, very let's say common issue. Removing the DPF, and also an mixture, incorrect mixture. So for light to very severe failures. Another task that we look into, actually another task that we should do is looking into the inspection data from several countries, and hopefully we will get data from, let's say if we have data from Turkey and Finland, we hope we will get data also from Greece and from one another country, members of the consortium, so we can have a good let's say comprehensive analysis and draw some conclusions. Here you see the data from Turkey, and more specifically for the tire thickness and the brake deviation. For those that they don't know how to translate a box plot, the line between of the box is the median. You see the upper and the lower leg. The lower leg, it refers to the first quartile, and the other one, the third one. So you have, let's say, the number of measurements within the 25% and the 75%, and then you see the crosses, which are the outliers. It's really interesting. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but you see some differences in the vehicle types. Obviously, we cannot refer to which types are those. We just indicated numbers, but there are also trends like the brake deviation percentage for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see that the median is more or less comparable, and the lower leg, you see it's 0, because that's obvious. You cannot have a deviation below 0, so the minimum is 0. These are also some examples for the Finnish data. The first graph to the left, it says the failures versus the year of registration of the vehicle for the years 2017, 18, 19. The right top is for the failures versus the year of registration, the percentage, so how many vehicles failed and how many vehicles have been checked. It's nice to see that you can have a polynomial actually that describes the development through the years. It's a second order, so it's not something complex. And with a very nice R square, so we can predict more or less, at least in Finland, the percentage of failures. And also you have at the bottom end, you have the median of the odometer for the vehicles, and you see also several the same pattern for vehicles that they are 3 years old, the green line for the 6 years old vehicles. So that's also interesting to see how many kilometers the vehicle is driven and where you find more failures, and to correlate the mileage with the failure of during the inspection. This slide says few things about tempering of the EPS system, so it's the environmental protection system. So the main, let's say, there are general 4 tempering techniques. The reflection of the ECU, so it's, let's say, deleting all the OBD faults or deactivating actually the EPS system. The emulators, which are communicating with the CAN bus. And then we have the modifiers, which are, let's say, alter the control state of the EPS system. It's a lighter version of an emulator. And the suppressors, what we said before in the first presentation, which are actually erasing the fault codes from the storage unit. Can we use OBD scans for inspection? This is actually introduced in the legislation for the periodic technical inspection. Not many countries using that in Europe. And actually, you have the possibility to either, sorry, I have to send screen here, to either do the tests as used to, so to measure the exhaust emissions, or to look into the OBD values. However, this is not really so effective. Actually, both the combination could be the right choice. So from the data collected actually from France, but provided to the CITA, the International Motor Vehicle Inspection Committee, you see that looking to the OBD system is not sufficient to ensure exhaust emission level monitoring. And an example to that could be, let's say, of manipulating or having remove the particle filter or the EGR, modifying the EGR. The engine manager software that circumvents, let's say, all the problems and shows that the vehicle works well. This could be a problem when you use the OBD to monitor, but when you measure the exhaust emissions, then you identify that there is a problem. Here we have very interesting slides from the maintenance and tempering testing that VDT has done the previous months. Unfortunately, we don't have so much time now to explain all of that in detail. So the colleagues used the new European driving cycle and the Artemis urban cycle with cold start and warm start. And we have the scenarios of having the vehicle, so not maintained, then changing the air filter, the spark plugs, the oil filter, and the oil, and then doing the tests. What you see here is that, for example, for the Artemis cycle, there is a difference in CO and slight difference in the hydrocarbons. We see also in PMs. However, if we look into the European cycle, let's say the data, the results are more or less the same, very slight differences. Now, moving into, let's say, the tampering, so cleaning, sorry, not tampering, but again, we're still in maintenance, cleaning the DPF or the renewal of DPF, and we did again the tests. So we see here that the opposite actually, that with the European cycle, there is an improvement. With the Artemis, we see different results, but again, take care of the numbers of the results and the emissions of gases. So now the questions that you might have is why this happens. We thought that maybe the performance of the engine could be a contributing factor. However, the colleagues of VDT, they interpreted as not the appropriate method for having reliable results, the method actually that we used for the testing. And this is the last slide of my presentation of what we are going to do for monitoring, tempering, and poor maintenance. So we have, let's say, we go from the left, the top bottom left, the tampered vehicle, an exaggerated vehicle, of course, and then we collect data through the OBD or the CAN bus and the sensors. We use here a mobile phone because it is our solution at the moment. Could be, of course, an embedded device in the vehicle systems. Then the data will be transferred through Wi-Fi or GPRS to a cloud database. The data will be analyzed. That will be, let's say, cloud computing. And then there will be information through a dashboard to the local authorities. And then here ends the MODALES work and the proposed solution. And then what the governments or the European Commission will do, it's their own decision. However, they will have the possibility to look into the vehicle, the specific vehicles, and ask the owners to do an inspection and not giving them the time to modify their cars, let's say with a notice of 2 or 3 days. And then through the data collected by the device and the inspection results, there will be a penalty, or again, it's not up to MODALES to propose, but the governments, the local governments will decide how they will inform or penalize the driver for illegal or inappropriate behavior by tempering the vehicle. So in this case, we will collect some GPS data just for illustrating or demonstrating. It will be the Greek data, but as our colleagues and Sebastian said before, the MODALES is based on anonymized data. However, here we have to deal with a tool that the government will use. So anonymization of data is then another story, can be overcome by legislation. That's it. I don't know if you have any question. Otherwise, we move to the last presentation. I will give the floor to Esther.
Thank you, Dimitris. Can everyone see my presentation?
Actually, Esther, no, we cannot see that. Yes, now we can.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So thank you very much for joining, everyone. My name is Esther Tenge from Spark Legal Network, which is a legal research consultancy in Brussels and London. And for MODALES, we looked at and conducted research on the legal issues on tampering. We'll run through the research in this presentation, of course, just to give you an idea of what we have looked at, but there's also a full report that's already on the MODALES website, which is, of course, a lot more detailed. As part of this presentation, we'll really briefly run through the methodology, the legal requirements on vehicle tampering, what we found at national level in terms of penalties and sanctions, as well as strategies and initiatives in place at member state level. And then we'll have a really brief look at the effectiveness of the rules on tampering and enforcement. So in terms of the methodology, as I mentioned, we conducted research on the legal situation on vehicle tampering in the member states. And in order to do this, we collected data through two different methods. So we had national legal experts carrying out legal research in their member states in 14 countries, so 13 of which were member states and the UK. And then we also sent out a stakeholder survey to stakeholders, both governmental, industry, associations, to get a bit more of an idea of how those rules and requirements are, for example, perceived by those stakeholders. And on the basis of this data, we carried out a comparative analysis in which we compared the data at member state level, looking at what are the similarities and what are the differences. So in terms of the legal requirements on vehicle tampering, so there are requirements at EU level. And these are sort of divided into EU law on type approval and EU law on periodic roadworthiness tests, so the post-type approval processes. In the context of, sorry, I'm just moving my thing. In the context of EU law on type approval, EU law basically sets out that defeat devices are prohibited. It doesn't really define tampering as such, except in the context of heavy-duty vehicles. And then post-type approval, EU law and principles basically state that member states need to consider measures to prevent the manipulation or tampering with vehicle parts and components. And what we looked at is how the EU law is implemented at national level, as well as if there's any other national laws that are relevant. And what we found in the member states was that there are very few national requirements or national rules that go beyond what is laid down at EU level. And on this slide, I'll just give you some examples of what we found. So in terms of type approval, for example, in the Netherlands, we found that that in terms of type approval, defeat strategies are actually prohibited. So that is just implementation of EU law. And then in Germany, sorry. And then in Germany, the law actually goes a bit further. So the national law prohibits the preparation of offences related to vehicle tampering. And then in relation to post-type approval, so in Finland, oh sorry, in Finland, in terms of post-type approval rules, a vehicle may actually not be modified after it's been commissioned and has taken into use. And in Ireland, the system is actually a bit different. So the rules on type approval actually specifically apply to roadworthiness testing. And it is mentioned in the national law that emission control systems cannot be modified. And if they are, then that's considered a major deficiency in the context of roadworthiness testing. So then in terms of penalties and sanctions at national level, so what we found here is that there's actually a huge difference in the member states in terms of the penalties and sanctions in place. So in terms of type approval, the penalties are of course mostly applicable to manufacturers. But for example, in Slovakia, we found that if there is a sanction for a breach of rules on type approval, then there's a fine of 300 to 50,000 euros that can be imposed. Whereas in Ireland, there's also a fine, so from 5,000 euros to 100,000 euros. But in addition, there's criminal sanctions that can be imposed as well. So either from 6 months up to 12 months. So that's quite a big difference, of course. And then in terms of post-type approval rules, we actually saw the same. So here again, 2 examples to really show you the difference in terms of national rules and the approach that member states took. So in Luxembourg, breach of the rules on type approval can lead to imprisonment, so from 8 days to 1 year, as well as a higher or lower fine. Whereas in Finland, there's only a very limited fine of 70 euros for a vehicle violation. So this really shows you that there is a huge difference and huge diversity across the member states in terms of penalties and sanctions that can be imposed. Then we also took a look at national strategies and initiatives that may be in place at the member states level that relate to vehicle tampering. And what we found is that these tend to fall within 2 groups. So some of them relate to access to mileage history, and some of them relate to the measuring of emissions. So in Slovakia, for example, there's a system where everyone can request a mileage certificate. You only need to provide the number of the vehicle and pay 8 euros, and you will get that information from the national database. And in the Walloon region of Belgium, there is a strategy and initiative in place at national level where they're testing remote emission measurement equipment along the highway. So there's a lot of different other examples in the report, but these are just to give you an idea. And then in terms of the effectiveness of the rules on tampering and the enforcement, so we asked our national legal experts to also have a look at what is the awareness of the rules and the effectiveness of the rules at national level. So in terms of awareness of the rules, it was very difficult to find any sort of real data, but it was found that the media coverage on the topic, also in relation to Dieselgate, probably did cause awareness to rise in the member state on the rules on tampering. And then in terms of the effectiveness of the rules on tampering, so for example, the ones that I went through as part of the previous slides, most of the studies at national level found that the national systems are generally proportionate and efficient, but there are some gaps in national legislation which were identified. So for example, in Germany, the national law prohibits odometer manipulation, but not the sale of manipulation devices. So these were some things that were pointed out at national level. And then in relation to the enforcement of the rules on tampering and the effectiveness of that, so what is really the enforcement rather than the rules themselves? What was pointed out in most of the member states was that quite often there's a lack of effectiveness on enforcement that stems from also a lack of severity of the sanctions in place. So for example, in Finland, there was a study that showed that the rules on tampering were not considered dissuasive enough, especially because the sanctions in that member state were so low, are so low. So that's it quite briefly. As I think some of the colleagues mentioned, is that we'll look at recommendation and best practices, etc. Moving forward, but this was just to give you a flavor of what we've been doing so far.
Thank you very much, Esther. We are really happy that we have lawyers for doing this work and not engineers. And you can look more into detail. And I think also for the recommendation part, we will be more pragmatic than just proposing theory if you really have lawyers on board. So from my side, thank you very much to all the presenters for all these interesting presentations. Even though I think the time was not enough, we would like to have more time for explaining everything more in detail. So we're on to a discussion session now, where people can, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, and my colleague Jean-Charles will moderate that. And in case there aren't any questions or not many, he has a few up his sleeve as well. So maybe Jean-Charles, you could take over.
Yes, sure. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be with you all and to see how we have evolved in this project MODALES. As an introduction to this session, I would like to say that with all the presentation you have seen this morning, you know better about the purpose and the challenges we are facing with this project. But you also can appreciate the different competences of our partnership. Even at the end, you have seen that we have lawyers, right? Which makes our work quite interesting and wide with respect to that topic. On the other hand, we have also seen with the two sessions of this morning that the second one, which was a little bit more technical, then didn't raise any questions. So somehow we can maybe think that the attendees are more interested by the low emission driving topic and the corresponding app that we are developing than these other technical aspects. But of course, it will be a pleasure to address them, and I may have a few questions afterwards on that. But looking at the chat, I don't see any further questions. So maybe I will take it from some of the presentation we had this morning and the open question that we started to answer, but we said we can maybe take them in that Q&A session. And the first topic is related to the eco-driving guidance and the training that we are doing. And we were somehow questioned about how far we take eco-driving into consideration. And I can say that more widely, we could say how far our project will distinguish itself from eco-driving as we are addressing low emission driving. So can we say already something on this topic, or do we have to wait about the result? And when we have the result, what we will do? So I open the floor to our panel, but maybe Ted, you can start to answer first, as you were the first one to maybe answer that question.
Yes, Sensors. Thank you. Just a moment to open my camera. Okay, so there are quite some overlaps between eco driving and low emission driving. There is no like complete difference or gap. Both try to achieve something, and even lower emissions and ecologic driving, like fuel savings driving, sometimes is the same. So we will use the tips, guidelines, tips, whatever we have, the approaches from both results, either from research projects that have touched the topic of eco driving or low-emission driving. And yeah, I think Zansal, if I covered you in that.
Okay, anyone wants to answer that topic as well from the panel?
And maybe, Andrew, I'll maybe add something small that we did take into account a lot of previous projects as well. So there is a public report online. If you go on the project website under library and then deliverables, and then you see them by work package, and the first one under work package 2 is called Variability of Driving Behaviours and Low Emission Driving Requirements, and this was led by University of Leeds, and it's taken into account all the sort of previous knowledge in that area. And then also the first one under work package 5 on the guidelines for low emission driving. And one of the projects some of us worked on was called Eco Driver. It ended in 2016, and our colleague from Cerema, who's not presenting in this, was a partner, and so was University of Leeds and Ertico. And that project focused much more on human-machine interface and driver distraction, things like that, so we're not doing the same thing again. And that used some a mobile app, but also some integrated interfaces done by some car manufacturers. Obviously we've not got car manufacturers this time, so we're working on a slightly different solution, but we're building on the knowledge of projects like that and not replacing it, and we're looking at, you know, what was successful and what could be improved. So yeah, I'd say also the low emission driving is maybe not an alternative to eco driving, it is building on top of eco driving, because a lot of the eco driving work in some other projects just looked at fuel use and CO2, and here we're looking at other things. So I think it's like a bolt on top of eco driving to enhance it.
Exactly. If I can say, we will not try to reinvent the wheel, but we will build on that and try to take into account many different aspects that
Yeah, okay. I think that also the challenge we have is to see how much different it is. I mean, if there is, you say we build on it, right? But we have seen the complexity of reducing the pollutants, not CO2 only, which is a question of how much fuel you consume and how you press on your gas pedal and brake and things like this. But also with respect to the engine, it depends. It's more complex. What we have seen that these NOx topic is quite complex, and sometimes we may have contradiction between, let's say, an eco driving recommendation and a low emission driving recommendation. And I know that we will try to address that, and then to come up with conciliation between both, right? Anyone want to react on that? What I just said.
Jean-Jacques, can I chip in
yes,
here?
Sure. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think yeah, the message really is given that there are multiple emission sources and also multiple air pollutants, multiple applications like safety, eco driving, and low emission driving. So the question is really the challenge. One of the ground challenges we are facing here is really how to balance this one, how to bring them all together. So the good thing about this project is we are looking at not only the aggregated average driving behavior and so on, but we also look at the macro behavior of the driving patterns. So we are hoping that at the end of the day we could quantify as you said that how much eco driving and low emission driving share the same the guidance and so on, but when, where, and they cannot actually agree together. So I agree to the earlier comments about eco driving. Actually, some of the devices can reduce the emissions, for example, braking, the brake wear and tire wear and so on. But what we have noticed, given the data available so far, that in several situations, the eco-driving and low-emission driving, they are not going side by side. So that is something we need to tackle. I think it's quite the journey location specific, I think, at the end of the day. But we have a methodology to bring them together, and also we have a methodology to give the different stakeholders to concentrate on which bits they wanted to optimize.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I think it's really what we are trying to do and to identify the place of these low emission driving and how maybe different it is from eco driving. But what is also interesting is that we do not address only in that project emissions of particles from the ICE, so the internal combustion engine, but also from tires and brakes, which for the next generation of vehicle, as you all know, will be mostly electric, right? So normally no more ICE, so engine particle emission, but still tires and brakes. And this is a topic that then can be carried out with respect to these, right, emissions. So yeah, so I think that we can close this topic unless there is someone from the audience who wants to add something in the chat. No, we have very silent people. That's nice. I hope you get all our information. Then we had another topic which we said we may extend the discussion on. It was with the privacy issue. So the way we handled it, we said that we are somehow we ask the consent of the people, then we separate between the treatment of the data from what is used really for the app and what is personal data. We don't look at them normally, we aggregate results, things like this. Is it enough? Do we want to say more on this? So I don't know, Juan, you were the one first concerned, I think, when we had all our meeting, because we are with, let's say, Barcelona testing, for example, in these pre-tests that we are doing now, the ramp-up test, we are just collecting the data, where the privacy issue is coming, of course. But then, of course, when we will have our real test, we also will not track the GPS data, so we will do it differently. But maybe we can say already something on this.
Maybe you could say.
This is Arno. One comment on the data what we are getting from the telemetry. We are getting very detailed information, including the GPS, but we are never identifying the driver, and they are always company vehicles, so they are not private ones, what we are monitoring on the telemetry.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay. Then?
I was going to say that.
Okay.
Me?
No, please go ahead, Joan.
No, that now we are using GPS, but the idea is not to use it because the app has a sensor that should have the location as well. I mean the context in which the car is driving, but also this GPS data now is not being stored, and also it comes from the ID number, so it's not possible to link the ID number with the personal data from the list. The server cannot make this connection. Only I can have, and I don't have access to the data collected. So there's no way to match the data received from the app and the personal data that of the user. Sebastian wanted to add something.
Yeah, just a few additional details. Thank you for the question. I think it's very pertinent to ask it again. Actually, I think that, well, the main sensitive data that is currently collected, but this is because we are in the early phase of these data collection campaigns. This is really, well, about GPS data, right? So currently we are collecting this kind of data because we need somehow ground truth metrics, you know. So basically, we need a reference data to calibrate our models. I think this fully makes sense to collect them now. But then when we will publish the mobile application, when we will launch the official experimental campaign in September, we will not collect anymore this GPS data, or at least we will not store it. I mean, I think it's important to say as well that this mobile application is not a navigation application. So we do not use directly this GPS information. Why do we need this GPS information? Is mainly to get information, for instance, about the topology of roads, about the traffic jams, about the type of environment, etc. But actually, we do not need necessarily GPS data to deduce this kind of information. So what we will do instead is to basically collect network traces from Wi-Fi and Bluetooth devices. This is an approach that we are currently developing at least with the support of the other partners. It's a completely privacy-friendly operation. This only needs a low amount of storage and battery, and this can be used somehow to deduce the context of a user. So for instance, if he is in a traffic jam, if he is, for instance, in a urban environment or a rural environment, and so on. And then when necessary, we might collect GPS data, but in any case, we will not store it. So it was very much, important for us to not store this kind of information, to fully respect the user's privacy. And then, at least from the mobile app perspective, we are not storing any kind of other details that might go against the privacy of the user. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, Jean-Charles, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe, but I have then another question. Is not the driver behavior related to the topography of the road and its environment? So somehow when we provide a recommendation to him, we should provide a recommendation because we know that he will approach certain situation, or I mean, he will have to brake, or he will, or we don't do that. I mean, what type then of recommendation we intend to give him if we have not access to his position, for example, or on the road network?
So basically, we will store this kind of contextual information. We need access to topological metrics and to the context of the user. I mean, I guess we need this kind of information to generate our recommendations, but we will only store the, let's say, the concrete indicators, you know, not the raw GPS positions of the user. And in order to do that, we will use different techniques. Well, we might use network traces, as I said. We might use, let's say, external web services to convert GPS data into privacy-friendly indicators. But yeah, I mean, the key message is that in our database, we will never store GPS data. But then, of course, we might need to use them to deduce, for instance, the type of road or the weather, for instance, or this kind of information.
Jean-Charles, can I just add a couple of comments here as well?
Sure.
Yeah. Leeds is responsible for data analysis, so I just want to comment on what we are planning to do. First of all, I think whenever possible, we try to arrange different people for example, the collection of personal data, and then the person who is going to analyze data. So we separate this one wherever possible. Secondly, when we look at even there's a GPS data available, like for example, VTT data, they know the drivers, they know the age of the drivers, they know the GPS trajectory of the runs and so on. But at the end of the day, we look at the driver categories rather than just compare, the individual drivers and the behavior between them. So at the end of the day, we wanted to look at whether there's a representative categories for different driving behaviors on the top of what we already said, following the the data protection regulation and so on. But still, at the data analysis level, we can do something about the privacy and the data protection and so on.
Very good. Let's maybe leave this topic. We have a question from the attendee. It's Heinz Stevens, who is asking these questions, and is mentioning that it is related to the first presentation, so I guess Johanni's presentation. And he's saying that it was mentioned that the routes and driving times were chosen in that way that the driving behavior will not be affected too much by the traffic. This will result in higher differences in driving behavior than for dense traffic or heavy traffic load. So the question is, how do you ensure that you can draw generalized conclusions from the results, knowing this? So Johanni, are you able to answer this question, or anyone else? Hello? It was quite a long one, right? So it's mainly related to how we have done our analysis, I guess.
Well, while we are waiting for Johanni to connect, probably he's muted. Can I just make the short comments here?
Yeah, sure, you can. Sure.
I think the really a significant contribution from VDT trials is to look at, generally speaking, what is the impact of driving behavior without having too many factors to consider at the same time, such as the traffic conditions. But at the end of the day, the driving behavior under different traffic conditions will be the topic of MODALES. We have different locations to collect the data. The international partners will bring in their existing, studies between the driving behavior under different traffic conditions, and also under these conditions, what the emissions from vehicles would be. So I just want to comment on that. It's a fantastic question to address. I'm hoping that the test could be done under different traffic conditions, but at the end of the day, real trials are very, very difficult, very, very time-consuming and expensive.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Johanni is still there.
Yeah,
yes,
but okay, you were muted by us, right?
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. So what I wanted to say is that we did not have much possibilities to really understand what is the interaction of the normal traffic to the results of our driving tests. Of course, we could observe how well the driver did replicate the driving while he or she was driving 2 times the same route in succession. That was one thing we wanted to know, how well it replicates, and when it does not replicate, what would be the reason? Would the reason be external, like traffic lights being red or green on the other route, on the other ride, or whether there is something else? We did have some cases where there was an accident or an incident that created a traffic backlog at some rides were lost because of the car was stuck in a traffic jam, and we removed those lost ones from the final data because we did not want to have them to disturb the results, but we wanted to have as well as possible two signatures from one driver on a given car.
Okay.
And I think
yes.
we succeeded pretty well, I think.
Okay, thank you. I think we have also another question from Elina Etoniemi. And she is asking if we are investigating how the average emission from the real world measurements correspond with official statistics or type approval values. I mean, so somehow how far what we do is coherent with what is known. And so
yes, if you have time to review the slides more carefully, there are the type approval values
okay.
refer to both the NOx and PN, as well as CO2 and fuel consumption. So there is relevance to the levels of type approval. And Dimitris is showing also the results for the maintenance tests. And that includes both the limit value as well as the type approval value for that given vehicle type.
So efficient, right? So this shows you teamwork, right?
Yep.
That's very good. And then for Dimitri, I had also maybe a question if we do not have. I think it's fine. With respect to vehicle maintenance, I mean, the studies have shown that the vehicle maintenance is very important for emission control. And does this data analyzed in MODALES support such a claim? And if not, why? Can you?
Well, yeah, we just show some of the slides. Of course, looking into the test data and the test results, you see slight differences. And we didn't expect also huge differences because of changing the oil or the air filter. There will be a huge, let's say, degrees of exhaust gases. However, if you look into a larger scale of monitoring vehicles for good maintenance, it's not only a matter of emissions, it's also a matter of safety. I think the effect will be much larger. So this is a step, I think, in the work package 7 for us to extrapolate data of our test results and our findings, and then to look, let's say, the real size of the effect of our work. But looking to just data of testing of 2 or 3 vehicles, we don't see extreme results that prove that maintenance will contribute too much to emission, let's say, emission reduction. Of course, for normal maintained vehicles, I don't mean for vehicles that have removed DPF or other drastic changes, but then we are talking about tampering and not really maintenance.
Yeah, this is I would say a complicated topic. It depends also from country to country. I mean, the tampering, as we have seen, is maybe not the same one country than the other. Then the way the legislation is made is also not exactly the same. So that's quite a complex topic, but it's also part. I mean, for emission, when we will have only electric vehicles, maybe this aspect will be a little bit lower, I guess. Okay.
Charles, may I have your words? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
The result that Dimitris showed told that there might not be much difference between pre-maintenance and after maintenance. but we have to bear in mind that these all vehicles that we tested had roughly not much more than 20,000 kilometers between the scheduled maintenance. So we were not, unfortunately, able to find vehicles that had been really badly treated, like driven like 50,000 kilometers without change the oil or filters. Then it would be maybe a different story, but it's difficult to find that kind of vehicles.
Can we also say that the newest are the vehicle, less the maintenance issue is relevant, because the maintenance, I mean, the time you need to do maintenance is, I mean, you can drive your vehicle for a longer time than before, right? Where you had to do maintenance. So newer vehicles are better with respect to this than old vehicles, of course.
Yes, that's completely true, because the modern vehicles also have all sort of compensation. They can learn from the situation and compensate. The ECU can for instance, they can tune if there is less air because of the clogging of the air filter. The fuel air mixture will be tuned to the situation correctly to avoid excess emissions. Of course, it will also lower the maximum power of the vehicle, but talking about pollution, it will compensate these deficiencies. So the new vehicles are more tolerant to abuse.
Okay. I don't see any other questions from the audience. I have maybe a last one, as we are, I mean, in order to look a little bit at what is special with emission, and that CO2 is related to NOx, right? So I have here one question for maybe Arno. Based on the real world NOx emission data collection from the retrofit buses in London that you presented, what are the most influencing factors that affect the efficiency of the after treatment system? And knowing that, I would add, do we have a good way to reduce that by changing the bus driver behavior?
Good question. The main factor on the emission and performance of after treatment system is temperature, and sometimes temperature and driving speed do have a correlation. So sometimes a fast driver might have low emissions in terms of grams per kilometer. That's correct. But then you need to do those kilometers. If you're in a traffic jam and your average speed is something like walking speed, then it's difficult to have the speed. And therefore the grams per kilometer emissions are always going to be high, but they may not be high in terms of grams per hour. So also you have to look on the unit. But it seems that a good maintenance on the vehicle, especially on the heavy vehicles, that's even more important than on the passenger cars. That's our feeling on that.
Okay. Very good. I think we are now reaching almost the end, and I think that Andrew would like to close the eye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted first to thank all the one having presented and answered the questions from the MODALES project, and also the audience for having followed and answered and put questions to us, right? But now I will leave Andrew to close our webinar, I think, and event. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Joshua.
You're welcome.
So I think it was a interesting event. I know we get webinar fatigue when we've been online more than 3 hours, so I'll finish as quickly as possible. Just for next events, hopefully sometime we'll see each other physically. On 13-15 July, for any Spanish speakers in the audience, Joan Domingo from RAC will present at the Spanish ITS Congress, both in Madrid and online as a hybrid event, so we'll present the project in Spanish. And then in October we have the ITS World Congress in Hamburg, so it's our really big event of the year in Ertico, which we're organising, and we have a session that's just been accepted, which is going beyond eco-driving, as you see from the title here, and it will be a joint session with our colleagues in the Parallel Projects UK, which is coordinated by TNO in Netherlands, and CARES, which is coordinated by IVL in Sweden, and some members of those projects are actually in this call, so we'll look forward to meeting you here, and also from the company here, so not a project but a company, talking about their application. Also in this Congress there'll be a technical paper expected from Hypochen at Leeds University. And then after this, of course, we gave a snapshot well, a long snapshot of what we have been doing in the past year and a bit. Some of our partners, of course, there wasn't time for all of our partners to present, so some of them who are working in specific areas like brake emissions or tyre emissions, when there are more results, we will consider making targeted webinars, maybe on a more technical topic, also as we get results. So we'll let you know when there is a more focused webinar for those who are interested. Just follow our media, our social media and so on. You'll see here how to stay connected. So you see our website and LinkedIn group you can join to be up to date with news, and also a Twitter hashtag, or you can just follow Ertico. We'll make presentations that you saw today available on the project website next week. We'll also put the recording online. That might take a little bit longer, but hopefully end of next week or the one afterwards. And then anyone who you know who missed today, or who couldn't, or who had to leave early, can maybe see the rest of it. So I hope this was interesting for you. I hope to stay in touch and to see you at a real event sometime fairly soon. This was the last real event that we had in this project. This was January 2020, before COVID hit us all, and we had a nice time in Toulouse in France, hosted by Serema, in a meeting on a barge, so a different mode of transport, and I hope we can do something like this again soon. So thanks for joining, and goodbye. Maybe all the presenters could perhaps come online if you're there. Say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.